Okay, so let's hear now from a representative of the commodity sector who's at this stage indirectly affected by this controversy. We've got these ongoing anti-pipeline blockades, raising questions for some about the process of resource development and Indigenous consultation in Canada. We're joined by Bryan Cox. He's president and CEO of the BC LNG Alliance. Bryan, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Pleasure to be with you, Andrew.
Bryan, just remind us, who does your group represent?
So the BC LNG Alliance represents the major proponents in British Columbia for the LNG opportunity that we have. So LNG Canada, Woodfibre LNG, Kitimat LNG, as well as other members that are looking to build projects here in British Columbia.
But not Coastal GasLink, which is obviously a TC Energy project.
So Coastal GasLink's not directly a member of the BC LNG Alliance, but obviously this project will feed the LNG Canada facility, which will be the lowest emitting LNG facility in the world, providing our clean, responsibly produced natural gas to parts of the world that need it.
And who says it's going to be the lowest emitting LNG facility?
Well, the project itself. So I think it's really important to talk about this project, Andrew,
the project proponents say it's going to be the lowest.
No, there's actually a study that's been done by independently that shows that the emissions intensity of the LNG Canada project will be the lowest in the world once it is in operation. And that's predominantly because of the innovation that's used with the high efficiency turbines and the hydroelectricity that we have here in British Columbia. And the other projects that we're looking at will be the lowest emitting as well. And this is really the advantage that we have in British Columbia and Canada with our clean hydroelectricity grid, our innovation, and our ability to get our product to market, that this really is Canada's opportunity to play an outsized role in providing global energy solutions to parts of the world that really need it.
Okay, so what is your take then as a group on this, the mess that's been made of consultation with the Wet'suwet'en community?
Well, we agree it's time to get Canada moving again. And I think really it's important to look back at this project and see the work that's been done from the very beginning. This is an industry that's been conceived from the very beginning in partnership with Indigenous communities. And you see it with the agreements with all 20 bands along the route, the work that's been done over the past 8 years to a decade with those groups, and the fact that those agreements have been signed by the communities themselves. They have done their due diligence, Andrew. They have done their work, and they have decided that LNG is the right opportunity for them in the Coastal GasLink pipeline. And I think that's a really important comment to make, that Indigenous communities have done their work, they've made their decisions, and they're now working on the project. There's thousands of people that are working on this project right now, and many of them are Indigenous communities, not just working on the project, but actually businesses that are servicing this project. So this is truly an opportunity for British Columbia, for Canada, on the path of economic reconciliation. And I really think it's important that your viewers keep their eye on this project. It's a $40 billion project that's incredibly important for our nation.
Now, what about the Office of Wet'suwet'en Hereditary Chiefs? They're not on board. Consent wasn't won from them.
So I think it's really important to look at the work that's been done between the proponent and the fact that there are those 20 agreements in place. I think the fact that
sorry to interrupt you though. What about the Wet'suwet'en Hereditary Chiefs though? Agreement wasn't won there.
So the Wet'suwet'en chiefs obviously have been talking about the fact that they're not in support of the project. That's 5 of the 13 hereditary chiefs. All 5 of the elected bands have signed agreements with the proponent, and I think that's a really important statement to make. The conversations between the Crown that need to occur are occurring. You've heard the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition talking about that. The project has been approved. It's gone through all regulatory processes. It has agreements with all of the elected bands, and it's really important to look at that. And I think really importantly, Andrew, we need to look at why we're building this project. It's being done in the right way and for the right reasons. And if you look at the International Energy Agency, last week released a report showing that last year emissions were flat in the world. Even with a 3% growth in the economy. And that's a really important statement. And the reasons that they give for that is renewables, nuclear, and coal to gas switching.
Yeah,
the country that had
I'm
the
sorry,
largest reductions.
We're getting a little off topic there. I'm sorry, Brian, because we do want to focus on this issue of the Indigenous consultation. I mean, we've heard the sales pitch, obviously, for LNG Canada. It will bring enormous economic activity, there's no doubt. But how did the industry come to this pass? Why did they fail to win concessions from this group that the courts have said do have a legitimate claim to governance in the area?
So Andrew, it's very important to say that agreements have been signed with all 20 of the elected bands along this route, which was what the Coastal GasLink.
What about the hereditary chiefs?
I'm sorry?
What about the hereditary
chiefs? So
obviously
there's a group of hereditary chiefs that do not support the project. But the Coastal GasLink and LNG Canada worked to get agreements with all 20 of the elected bands, which represent 13,000 Indigenous people in the north, many of whom are working on this project, many of whom have been living in poverty for generations. And this is truly an opportunity to move Canada forward, move it forward together, Andrew. And I think we really need to focus on that, about what this opportunity is. Yes, there's obvious governance issues that the Wet'suwet'en need to work through internally to have a discussion on who speaks for them. But the proponents have gone above and beyond to get agreements with 20 of the elected band, including all 5 of the elected Wet'suwet'en bands. So very important to contextualize that.
Sure, but you're shrugging off the hereditary chiefs here, and isn't that the problem? They got shrugged off, and now they're blocking the project.
Absolutely, this is a discussion for the Wet'suwet'en people to decide who speaks for them. And that's a discussion that many First Nations have had here in British Columbia. There's hundreds of nations here in British Columbia. Each one is unique and different. And the Wet'suwet'en have a governance discussion that they are currently engaged in, and only they can decide who speaks for them.
Does this, I mean, give us the worst case scenario. Could this jeopardize LNG Canada?
This project is moving ahead because it's being built for the right reasons and in the right way. Your viewers can have full confidence that what's happening here in northern British Columbia is something that is a model, not only for Canada, but for the world in engaging with Indigenous communities. This project is doing it the right way, and we should have confidence in that. And there's an opportunity here, Andrew, to have a dialogue in Canada about what we want our energy industry to be, what we want Canada to be, because truly economic reconciliation and providing hope and opportunity to communities that have not seen it. We have Indigenous communities, brave new leaders that are making decisions for their people, and I think this is a very powerful time in our nation's history. And I think we are very, very committed and supported to these projects.
Are you frustrated with the federal or BC governments? I mean, we've heard for years that these treaty issues in BC have not been resolved. We've run into this thing again. It's often happened with resource projects. Are you frustrated that those governments haven't moved quicker to resolve these issues?
What we've been focusing on, Andrew, and I think it's important for Canada to look at what's been happening in British Columbia for the past several decades, is that there's very, very innovative partnerships with the resource industries and Indigenous communities in the mining industry, in the forestry industry, in the natural gas industry, and now in our brand new LNG industry. And that's really what we're focusing on. There's crown to nation discussions that obviously need to continue to be ongoing. The Wet'suwet'en people obviously have governance conversations that they need to have, but the partnerships and work that are being done between industry and Indigenous communities in British Columbia, I think perhaps Canada is just now starting to look at what's happening here in BC. We have a wonderful story to tell. We have a story of economic reconciliation that's happening as we speak, and I think it's time that as Canadians we start focusing on that and how we support more of that happening.
Thanks a million, Brian, for joining us today. Bryan Cox is President and CEO at the BC LNG Alliance.